I want to take a look at expertise and how to measure it. I had a letter from one of our readers who wanted to really take a frank look at how do you measure what your actual level of skill is, both in the context of whether to take a project on. You know, you've got your fabric and you've got your book with the picture of the dress you want to make, and how do you measure whether you're good enough to do that? And then go on to looking at it in a professional context too. I mean, when I say good enough, I'm not talking in the sense of self-esteem. This is not going to be a kind of little rah-rah, oh, of course you're good enough to give it a go. What I mean is, how do you know whether you've actually got the goods? How do you know whether you've got the skills to take something on or whether you're aiming too high? And I think in the context of sewing as a hobby, if you're a hobbyist, if you're picking out at the moment your gala gown for costume college, as I'm doing, and you're wondering whether, you know, you're getting the fabrics together and you're like, am I biting off more than I can chew here? In the context of a hobby, go into it with just curiosity. In the context of a hobby, you're not trying to impress anybody but yourself. You don't need to prove anything. If you go in with curiosity and a willingness to grow, a bit of anxiety is a good thing because that's how you know you're pushing yourself. And it's just a question of going in with enough curiosity to give something a go because you love it, and trusting yourself to figure out how to make it work. Because whatever you've taken on in the past, somehow at some point you've come to a point where you just make it work. Just trust in your ability to make it work. So that's in a hobbyist sense, but what about when you're professional? First of all, how do you know when to go professional? How do I know that I'm really good enough to present myself as a pro? And how do you convince other people and potential customers of your expertise? And we had a question in one of our calls a couple of weeks ago about, if I'm new to being a professional, what do I do if somebody asks how long I've been doing this? So this is a question that comes up a lot when we have our competition go live, because we have to split everybody up according to skill level, because you can't judge beginners against pros. You know, they've got completely different skill levels. So how do you create categories and cut-off points to define what somebody's expertise is? And we find it, and this is the hardest thing about the competition, because it's just so hard to measure it. Many people will say, well, I'm a beginner, but what does that mean? Does that mean this is your first course? Is it your 12th course? How do you know whether somebody's really a pro? Somebody could have taken on one order from a friend and that makes them a pro. So there's a common misconception, or there's been a common theme that's going around in the last few years about it taking 10,000 hours to become an expert at something, 10,000 hours of practice and you'll be an expert. And that actually comes from this book here by Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole about peak performance. And their study showed that yes, it is 10,000 hours that makes you an expert, but you have to be practicing in a particular way. You can't just do the same thing for 10,000 hours and call yourself an expert. There has to be particular ways that you practice, and that shows, if you think about it, in the difference between a relative beginner who's been working for a year and has been trying so many new things and has this voracious passion about learning about their craft and is showing incredible work, as compared to a seamstress who's been working for 40 years but hasn't really progressed that much, and they're kind of still making the same dresses they did when they started 40 years ago. You might well say that that person who's been practicing for a year and trying tons of new things and building their skills may well be more skilled than the woman who's been making the same dress for 40 years. So you can't really measure it by the amount of time you've been practicing. And that's one of the things I sometimes have to explain to people when we're picking categories. it's also, people try to measure themselves with our competition. Why? Well, they want an extra category for just people who are professionals. But there isn't really a great way to even measure professionals, because there could be somebody who's been amateur for 20 years and is incredible, but they've never taken an order in their life, and they've never taken a commission in their life, and they never would, because they want it always to be a hobby. But somebody else who's been working for the same amount of time isn't as skilled, but has, set up a Facebook page and calls themselves here's our new design, we've been out on our photo shoot. That doesn't make you a pro either. So it's not even really a measure of expertise whether you call yourself a professional. So if you do decide to go professional, how do you measure that? How do you measure your expertise? How do you communicate to a customer that you know what you're doing? And how do you know whether you're good enough to take on a project? How do you know whether you're good enough to take on a project from a customer? Really, the only way to do it is to be truthful, to present your work as it is. When I'm putting people in the different skill categories in the competition, it doesn't matter what they tell me in the end about whether or not they're professional, how long they've been sewing. In the end, all I can do is look at the pictures of the stuff they've made and try to compare people based on the technical detail, the technical ability that they're showing, and trying to put people in categories based on trying to create a level playing field. So all you can do as a pro is present yourself truthfully. And what I mean by that is, when you go pro, there tends to be this sense of having to smarten up and present yourself as best you can. And yes, there's this old rule about when you go pro, you have to say we. You don't say I anymore, you say we to make yourself sound bigger and more important. And I really think that in this day and age, I have a great respect for any artist who calls themselves I. Here's my latest design. Here's my latest work for my client. And to be very truthful about it, and present your work as it is and show the technical pictures, as we've been trying to do in the competition, getting people to show the inside of their work or show what it really looks like, or not just, the fancy photo shoot pictures. It really shows nowadays. And in the business groups that I'm in, it's really coming out now that people don't want anymore to see you looking terribly, terribly professional. They want the real you. They want to get to know you. And it's worth remembering in a professional context that it's not just about the technical ability of what you're making, it's about the quality of the interaction with the customer. And by that I mean, how good an experience are you giving them? How are you making them feel about themselves as you're doing fittings and getting them ready for, say, their wedding? Are you building them up and making them feel beautiful as you're trying their dress or their corset on them? So I think it's about honesty in the end, and not building yourself up but not putting yourself down either, presenting yourself as you really are and letting your client decide. So it is about being honest with yourself. And sometimes it's difficult to do that because you can be anxious and put yourself down. So rely on the people around you. Rely on your skilled friends to tell you what they believe your level of expertise is compared to the people around you. And sometimes you can believe your friends' voices more than you can believe your own, because your own voice can be that nasty voice in the back of your head that's telling you you're not good enough. So I hope that helps with helping you measure your level of expertise. I'm developing my own ideas here as well, as you can tell, and I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below about how to measure your level of expertise, whether you're a hobbyist or whether you're professional. So I'm Kathy Hay. I hope this has been helpful, and do get inspired and do some sewing this week.